Hello students, I am Ishan Trivedi, Assistant Professor, Civil Engineering Department. Welcome you in a video lecture series. Today's topic is various classification of buildings. Topics to be covered in these sessions are classification of buildings based on occupancy, classification of building based on use, classification of buildings based on structure, type of residential building, and at last some important terminologies. Let us start with the classification of building based on occupancy. Let us start with residential buildings. These are the buildings in which sleeping accommodation is provided for normal residential purposes with or without cooking or dining or both the facilities. For example, private dwelling houses, apartments, flats, bungalows, these are the example of residential buildings. Next is educational buildings. This shall include any building used for school, college or daycare purposes involving assembly for instruction, education or recreation. Third is institutional buildings. These shall include any building or part thereof which is used for purposes such as medical or other treatment, or you can say care of any person suffering from physical or mental illness or diseases, or you can say care of infants in which the liberty of inmates is restricted. Here nobody is allowed to do their own choice activities. The institutional buildings ordinarily provide sleeping accommodation for the occupants. The example of institutional buildings are hospitals, nursing homes, jails and orphanage. Next is assembly buildings. These shall include any or part where the group of people gather for recreation, amusement, social, religious, political, civil, travel and similar purposes. For example, theatres, cinema halls, exhibition halls, auditoriums, marriage halls, museum and place of worship. Next is business buildings. These shall include any building which is used for transaction of business, for the keeping of accounts and records for similar purposes. The example of business buildings are courthouse, city halls, town halls, libraries, offices and banks. Next is mercantile buildings. These shall include any building which is used as shops, stores, market for display and sale of merchandise. Next is industrial buildings. These shall include building or the structure in which product or material of all the kinds and properties are fabricated, assembled or processed. Example of industrial buildings are assembly plants, laboratories, refineries, power plant, gas plant, mills and dairy mills. Next is storage buildings. These shall include any building used for the storage, sheltering of goods, wares or merchandise. For example, warehouses, cold storage, freight depots, transit sheds, garages, hangars and grain developers. Such facilities are provided just nearer to ports or near to the special economic zones. Next is hazardous buildings. These shall include any building which is used for storage, handling, manufacture or processing of highly combustible explosive materials or products which are liable to burn with extreme rapidly or which may produce poisonous fumes or explosions. So these are the classifications of building based on occupancy. Next is the classification of building based on use. Here the classification remains same as we learned in the occupation, but the classification is been determined based on residential building and non-residential building. The residential building includes the independent dwelling houses like detached unit, where all four sides of a building exposed to natural environment, or you can say these four walls are not attached to any other adjacent properties. Then semi-detached, where one wall is common between two units. Means here in Ahmedabad itself, you can see the surrounding societies where twin type of bungalows are there. That is called semi-detached house, where one wall is common and shared among two different properties. But in totality, it seems like a single unit. Next is row houses, apartments, flats, farmhouse, guest house. These are falls in residential building category. Then non-residential building category. Commercial buildings such as educational building, business, mercantile, storage, hazardous. These are the buildings which falls under the category of non-residential building, which serves the individual interest based on their requirement. Then public funding building. Next is public building, where all the government funded buildings are included like post office, police station, court and civic centers. And at last there is industrial buildings. So these are the classification of building based on use. Next is classification of building based on structure. We know that any building has the basic function of providing roof, which protect the building and its component and who is residing in the buildings, and protecting from sun, wind and rain. Here the load of roof, which is called dead load, and the load of person and the furniture on each floor, that is called live load, is to be transferred to the ground or earth. Here understand that the load of roof, slabs, these are the dead loads, whereas load of persons and the furniture placed on the flooring of each floor is called live load. These loads are transfers to the ground or earth. The vertical structural member which transfers the loads to the ground, this load is being transferred through various vertical structural members to the ground. These may be masonry walls, RC.C columns and beams, or both. So based on that, the classification of building based on structure are load bearing structure, RC.C frame structure and composite structure. Let us start with load bearing structure. In load bearing structure, loads are transferred by masonry walls of a building. Whatever the load coming from upper story, which is inclusive of roof, floors of all the floors, or you can say slab, which is transferred through walls. The story height of load bearing structure is been restricted up to 2 story. If I add more story, then the thickness of wall at the ground floor will be large. Here you can see the thickness of the wall which carries all the upper load is large, and that's why the inner dimension of the room at ground floor is reduced and one cannot benefit the space. So this is the characteristics of load bearing structure. Next is RC.C frame structure. Here the floor slab of all the stories are supported on a frame of RC.C beams and columns. Here the floor slab is supported by beams and beams are supported by columns, and thus from slab to beam and beam to column, the load is being transferred to the ground level. Thus you have to design column and foundation who can accommodate the design load. The number of story in RC.C frame structure would be more than 2. Now Composite structure. Here, the floor slabs are supported by masonry walls as well as the frame of columns and beams. In most of the residential apartments of high-rise building, you may see this kind of structure where the entire structure is of frame structure, whereas walls are sharing the upper structure load. Even this kind of structure is preferred when the number of stories are less, but the building span is horizontally scattered or it is in horizontally large area, such as warehouses or industrial units, where you can see the buildings are of lesser in story but it is horizontally spread on the ground. So these are the classification of building based on structural design. Now, type of residential buildings. This includes detached house, semi-detached house, row house or chawls, and last is apartments or block. Let us start with detached house. A detached house is nothing but a bungalow which is restricted up to 2 story. As I said earlier, the detached house is the independent house where all the four walls are of independent to the surrounding property and these walls are not sharing with adjacent property and the roof is also independent which is connected to all four walls. Here you can see the boundaries of two independent properties where none of the wall is shared among any of these two properties and thus these buildings called detached house. Next is semi-detached house. It is an attached twin of two similar detached houses with one common wall. Here you can see one common wall is there and rest of the three wall is independent. And here instead of 4 side open space, you can enjoy 3 side open space where you can accommodate wash area at back, side margin or side area for parking a vehicle and the front space for access. These two units are symmetrically planned and one is mirror image of another. Due to common partition wall, there is initial saving in the cost. The semi-detached houses assumes the excellent cooperation of both the dwellers right from construction. Otherwise, there is lagging in maintenance and repair works carried out in future. Here, the point is the construction work which has been carried out is in same manner. Otherwise, if any work is lagging, the inmates or the house owner would suffer in maintenance and repair work which has been carried out in future. Next is row house or a chawl. A row house or a chawl where the land is shared by more than two houses with two walls shared with adjacent units except for units at both the ends. Like here you can see the first wall and the second wall, these are the independent walls, whereas the intermediate wall of different units are shared among each other. Usually these are of two rooms, one as a dining cum kitchen and the other is as a bed cum living room. Each unit has a narrow frontage. You can see here each unit has a narrow frontage. These dwelling units are restricted up to 2 to 3 story. There is a slight difference between row house and a chawl. The row house is a self-sufficient dwelling unit, whereas in a chawl, the sanitary accommodation is being provided among few units, and these are common for all. Several seats has been provided for WC and few accommodation is provided for bathing purpose. Next is block, flats or terrace houses. A flat is a unit of two or more rooms providing accommodation for one family. They are constructed where the land is very costly and population accommodated in limited area. Adding more on that, in city area we have seen that people prefer to live near the workplace and spending less time and money in traveling from suburban home. In multi-story buildings, there are 3 to 4 flats are provided at each story with one common centralized staircase or lift to serve all the floors. This type of construction is very popular in big cities of our country. So these are the type of residential building. Now understand some important definitions. First is cottage. It is a small house built in an open area or field. It may be single story or a two story. You can say it is a farmhouse. Next is apartments. Apartment word is used in Western countries where there is set of rooms constructed solely for tenancy. It is only meant for tenancy and landlord provide all the facilities which is required in a living and give it to tenants. Next is flats. Flats are the unit or a suite of two or more rooms providing residential accommodation for one family. Here you can see in surroundings such high-rise buildings of flats where 2 or 3 bedroom hall kitchen are constructed for residential accommodation. Next is dormitory. It is a large hall in which many persons can sleep. These are provided in dharamshala and hostels. In military hostels or in dharamshala where the sleeping accommodation shared among the people and toilets and bathrooms are provided common for all. Next is outhouse. Outhouse is a small detached dwelling unit consisting of one room with kitchen. It is located at front or rear side of a bungalow and it is meant for only servant. In luxurious house, you can see there is separate access has been given for servants or security guards. This structure is called outhouse, where one room with kitchen is been given for servants. Next is low-rise buildings. The building height less than 15 meter having ground plus 2 story is called low-rise building. High-rise building. Building with height more than 15 meter but less than 30 meter is called high-rise buildings. Next is a dwelling unit. The term used to refer as a residential accommodation for one family with minimum requirement of one living room, one kitchen, one bathroom and latrine. Remember this term, the dwelling unit. Whenever it has been used, it resembles that one family can live with minimum requirements. These requirements are of one kitchen, one living room, one bathroom and latrine. Next is tenement. A building which is used as a dwelling unit for a family is known as a tenement. Again I am repeating, a building unit which is used as a dwelling unit for a family is called tenement. So these are some important definitions which will be used in further explanation. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you have learned about basic classifications of buildings. Thank you.